Hi everybody, Adam here. So as you can see, it is summertime happening. I have replaced my nice little light back here with a nice little fan because it is sweaty and hot all the time. But this week, what I wanted to talk about was the topic of protein. And in particular, a lot of the big myths and misconceptions around protein that I often see going around the fitness community. So, protein is a very important part of any fitness routine. Obviously, it's going to have a huge impact in terms of improving your recovery, in terms of making it easier for you to get better results from your workouts. If you're not getting sufficient protein, this is going to definitely hold you back in the long run. Regular consumption of protein helps to maximize your muscle protein synthesis, which is the fancy way of saying the amount of muscle that you build. Typically on any given day, there is a certain amount of muscle protein synthesis that is happening in your body, and there is a certain amount of muscle protein breakdown or catabolism that is happening in your body. And of course, you want that synthesis to be higher than that breakdown, because that means that over time, you're going to accumulate more muscle mass. The single biggest thing that you can do to improve that, of course, is simply to work out. Working out is the biggest stimulus that you can use to tell your body that, hey, we need to build more muscle mass over time. However, you can also get a pretty significant boost to that muscle protein synthesis by consuming protein as well in sufficient quantities. The effect is generally synergistic, which is to say that it's not something where you can just eat a bunch of protein on your own and see a huge boost in muscle protein synthesis, because that's just not how it works. Your body boosts your muscle protein synthesis from eating protein while you are also working out, but it does not necessarily do the same if you are not working out. So it's not like you can just eat a ton of protein and get jacked. There are also plenty of other reasons to eat a lot of protein, even if you are not looking to maximize muscle mass. Protein tends to be very filling relative to its size, and as a result, it tends to help manage hunger, especially, for example, somebody who is cutting weight or dieting. They want to be eating a lot of protein so that can help them manage their hunger so that they're not feeling hungry all the time. A lot of people simply do not get enough protein in their diets, in the typical American diet. It's simply something where they are either not getting enough of it or they're getting it sort of from the wrong sources, getting it from things like hamburgers or processed foods, as opposed to sort of lean cuts of meat that you are cooking at home. So jumping right into it, I want to start off with the first myth that I've heard a lot. I specifically used to hear this a lot more when I was starting out, and that is the myth that your body can only process about 25 grams of protein at a time. I've seen the number vary a lot. I've seen people say as, something like 15 grams. I've seen people say something as high as 40 or 50 grams. It doesn't really matter. Sort of the main thing is that I've seen all kinds of different numbers where people will say, hey, you eat a certain amount, that's it. That's all your body can use. There's no point in eating more than that, or maybe that it's potentially bad if you eat more than that. Now, there is some truth to this. So what happens is that when you consume protein, there is a spike in your muscle protein synthesis that I mentioned above. Again, making sure that you're also training regularly. And the amount of protein that maximizes that spike is around 20 or 25 grams. At the same time, however, that spike is a relatively small one, and you can continue to do it throughout the day. So the reality is that, in fact, your body does like to get smaller boluses of protein throughout the day, as opposed to getting a ton of it all at once. That said, it's not like all of that protein goes to waste if you consume it all at once. It is still going to be used for all kinds of other things. It's still going to have all kinds of other impacts on your diet. So while it is kind of true, it's not very helpful. And I wouldn't recommend worrying too much about getting too much protein in one sitting. Now, of course, if you're somebody who's going to sit down and consider something like chugging 3 protein shakes in a row, well, yeah, that's probably not going to help you at all. It would make more sense to spread that out throughout your day and focus on getting in smaller meals and spreading that out, as opposed to trying to get it all done at once. Another common myth is that you need to get in a crap ton of protein within 30 minutes after your workout, and that if you don't do so, your workout is essentially wasted. This is also, in a sense, a little bit true because it's kind of based on existing science, but it's also a huge misreading of that science. So essentially, there is an effect in which after you work out, you're in a basically catabolic state because you have worked out so hard, your muscles have been damaged, they're basically heavily affected by that workout. And so what you're doing is you are getting in that protein to spike that muscle protein synthesis to offset the fact that there's that bit of catabolism after exercise. That said, it turns out that they did a lot of research on this, and you can actually have a much bigger window than you used to think. In fact, it's really more like a couple hours in either direction from your workout. You can actually get in protein before your workout, and then as long as that protein is in your body will still use it to help boost that muscle protein synthesis after your workout. And so as a result, you don't actually need to do it afterwards. You can also get it in before as well. And of course, it's about 2 hours in either direction, so it's a much bigger window than people think. So the reality is that it's probably actually not as negative as people think, because the reality is that if you're talking about a 4-hour window around your workout, then the chances are that you've probably eaten a meal at some point in that window, and you've probably gotten some amount of protein in that window, and that means that it is less important that you immediately chug a shake directly after you get home. However, of course, it is still a good idea to make sure that you are getting in protein regularly, as I mentioned above, and so that will just kind of cover your bases anyway, so you probably don't need to worry about it too much. Another common myth: high protein intake is bad for you or bad for your kidneys. So again, this is a misunderstanding. The reality is that high protein intake is bad for people with very specific kidney issues. That is to say that if you have that underlying condition or disease, then it is a problem for you and you need to limit your protein consumption. However, they've tested things where they've given people absolutely massive protein doses, much higher than a typical person would eat, and the end result is that it's safe on healthy kidneys. So it's not something that you should be worried about unless, of course, again, you have some kind of pre-existing kidney issue, and then in that case, it's a whole other ball game. You shouldn't be worrying about this. You should be talking to your doctor. You should be figuring out an entirely different way to manage your diet. You should not be focusing on trying to eat a ton of protein and get as jacked as possible. So, simply a completely different realm of things. Another common myth is that meat is bad for you. This one is based, again, on a partial misunderstanding of the science. It's about the fact that they've done studies that initially seem to show that vegetarians and vegans have healthier diets as compared to a typical Western diet that also contains meat. However, the reality is that when you also then filter out for people who are what you would call, fitness enthusiasts, people who eat something more akin to a typical Western diet that includes meat, but they are also very health conscious and they worry about the quality of the food they're eating. They're not just eating junk food. They're not just eating highly processed foods. They're trying to focus on healthier foods. They're getting in a good veggie intake and so on. There's not a significant difference between those folks and the vegetarians and vegans. And so the end result is that, yes, there are some ways that eating meat can be unhealthy, which is to say that if you're eating it all in the form of burgers and highly fatty meats and so on, but the same thing can be said about basically any diet. The same thing can be said about vegetarianism and veganism. If you're going to eat a vegetarian diet that consists primarily of Oreos, well, that's not going to get you very far because Oreos are not very healthy for you. So it's something where it's very context dependent. There are healthy ways to eat meat and there are unhealthy ways to eat meat. And of course, it's not as simple as saying that meat is bad for you. You want to focus primarily on home-cooked lean meats as your protein source, and you want to avoid super fatty cuts, and you want to avoid burned meats, as this can also have a negative impact on your health over time. You want to avoid highly processed meats and instead focus primarily on home-cooked lean cuts of meats as your primary protein sources. Another common myth: you need to eat a ton of protein to get big. This one I think is largely spurred on by supplement companies trying to make money. If you tell people that they need to eat absolutely absurd amounts of protein in order to gain muscle mass, then of course basically the only realistic way for them to do so is to get it in the form of protein powder, and that's great for supplement companies looking to make money. So I think that there has been this sort of effect where bodybuilders who are sponsored by supplement companies would inflate the amount of protein that they say that they're eating each day in order to make it seem like you absolutely need their products in order to sell more and in order to make you more dependent on them. Of course, on top of that, the average bodybuilder is going to be significantly bigger than your average person, and so probably has a lot higher protein intake needs than anybody else anyway, and you probably shouldn't be basing your dietary choices off of what, some 300-pound bodybuilder looks like when you are, say, 160 pounds and basically, half that guy's size and therefore need half as much protein. There have been a lot of studies that attempted to clarify, exactly how much protein is sort of the max amount that people will benefit from. And what they tended to find was that the max amount was around 0.82 grams per pound of body weight per day. That is, for example, if you take a 200-pound person, about 160 grams of protein. So that is a significant amount. It's more than most people are eating generally. It's about 1/3 of your calories from protein. But at the same time, it's not nearly as absurd as a lot of the numbers that I used to see. I used to see people saying that 1 gram per pound of body weight per day was the absolute minimum, 1.5 was good, 2x, sometimes 2.5x, 3x was what you should be seeing, which doesn't really make sense. We are talking about numbers that are basically like, hey, you are getting upwards of maybe 50, 75, 100% of your calories from protein, which obviously is not true. No one is actually doing that. That's just not happening. So I would say that, it's very unlikely that those recommendations, which again, largely passed down from big bodybuilders and so on, probably no one is actually eating like that. It's probably just a lie. Another common myth is that you need to be eating protein powder in order to get your protein in. And of course, that one is not true. Protein powder is a great source for protein. However, it isn't necessary. If you are getting in all of the protein that you need elsewhere in your diet, then you don't need protein powder. The main benefit that you get out of protein powder is simply that it is convenient. Protein powder is simple. It's something where it is stable, it's shelf stable. All you have to do is toss it in some milk or some water, and then you've instantly and immediately got a good protein source. Whereas something like you take a cut of meat, you've got to cook that, you've got to, prepare that, you've got to spice it, you've got to cut it up and sit down and eat it or whatever. That takes a lot more time. It goes bad if you don't refrigerate it. It's not easy to, be portable, to pick up and carry it around. And so it's something where protein powder, the main benefit that it has is that simplicity and flexibility that it offers you. So you can do things like take a protein shake and go for a walk. You can take a protein shake to the gym. You can take a protein shake to work. It makes it a lot easier to get your protein in throughout the day. And that is the main reason that protein shakes become helpful. However, again, you do not need to use them if you're already getting in enough of your protein elsewhere. I, for example, used to just make a crap ton of ground turkey all the time. That was my primary protein. And so I would just eat that all day, and I didn't actually really need that much in the form of additional protein shakes because I was simply eating so much elsewhere. All right, and the last one, and I think that the one that will probably get me the most hate mail, is that eggs are not actually a great protein source. This one is something that is very funny to me because every time I mentioned it, it really shocks people. It just blows people's minds. But the reality is that if you look at the macronutrients for an egg has about 70 calories per egg, and of that, it has about 6 grams of protein. So the way that it works, a gram of protein is about 4 calories. So that means that about 24 of those 70 calories are from protein. That means that the amount of protein in that egg is about 30% of the total calories. Now, what does that mean? When we talk about a good protein source, we are typically talking about something that has more than a third of its calories from protein. And that's because, as I mentioned before, when you're eating a good amount of protein, about 0.82 grams per pound of body weight, that is about 1/3 of your total calories. However, most of the things that you are eating in your daily diet are not going to have a perfect, beautiful, even split of 1/3 protein to everything else. Typically, they're going to be primarily carbs or primarily fats and so on. And so what happens is that we eat a mix of things and we aim for, in total, about 1/3 of protein after the fact, which is to say by mixing all this other stuff together. So we are trying to eat things that contain more than 1/3 of their calories from protein in order to balance out the fact that we're eating other foods that have significantly less of their calories from protein. And so when you add eggs into the equation, that doesn't really solve anything. Yes, you're getting in some protein. Yes, you're getting in calories. And yes, that is sort of, in some way, it's getting you closer to your target because you are sort of crowding out the fact that you could just be eating, just carbs or something else. But the reality is that you still need to eat higher sources of protein in order to balance out the fact that you are eating, again, higher sources of carbs and fats elsewhere. So by definition, an egg is a very mediocre source of protein. It is an okay amount of protein. Yes, if you ate all of your calories from eggs, for example, or if you ate all of your calories from foods that contained about 1/3 of their calories from protein, then it would be fine. But the reality is that it's not the case. There is some protein in it, but you still need to rely primarily on other protein sources to really get you over that line to actually hit your targets per day without eating an excessive amount of calories from carbs and fats elsewhere. So for example, I looked up the macros for 100 grams of chicken. 100 grams of chicken contains 165 calories, of which 31 grams of protein, which is to say that about 80% of its calories are from protein. About 80%, again, compared to about 30% for the egg. Looking up 85% lean beef, again, 100 grams, it is about 250 calories and 26 grams of protein. So this is about 40%. This is not as good, but of course, again, if you get a leaner cut of beef, if you remove some of the fat from that, if you focus on that protein, then it does become a better protein source. And again, you're starting at 40%, so it really goes up as you take out more of that fat, and it gets it to be an even better protein source over time. So it's important to think about your protein sources, not just in terms of the raw sheer number in terms of the protein grams that you're getting in, but it's also important to recognize that that food is going to come packaged with other calories that you have to eat in the process, and that may or may not be useful in terms of what you are overall looking to accomplish in your diet. There are plenty of sources. For example, things like bacon has protein in it, but it also has a ton of fat. Same thing with your peanut butter. Those are sources of protein that, yes, they are sources of protein that will give you protein, but it may not be worth it simply because it's packaged with so many other calories that are not protein, and that makes it sort of, in the long run, not very helpful or not very good in terms of actually hitting your targets within the context of your overall diet. So of course, just be aware you should be focusing not simply on the actual number of grams of protein in your food, but also just the percentage of the overall food that is calories from protein. Anyway, that is it for today. I hope you liked this video. As always, click on that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, comment below, and let me know what you want to see in future videos. I will see you all next week. Have a good one.